Morning folks, I'm Dave Canterbury with the Pathfinder School, back with another in our Inkle Loom series. I said we'd go backwards in our progression a little bit with this because we had the loom built, we had it loaded, and we were in the middle of a project on the first video. So in the second video, I want to go backwards and show you how to load the loom and begin to weave on the loom. And then in the next video, we'll talk about actually making an Inkle loom. It's a very inexpensive project. So the tools that we're going to need is obviously our loom itself. We're going to need a couple tools that we can substitute for just a regular net needle if we choose. But if we're going to work with multiple looms and multiple weaving techniques, it's good to have a beater stick and a large shuttle like this, depending on the type of weaving you're doing. But these will work pretty good for a lot of different types of weaving. We're going to talk about several different types in this series. So we have a shuttle. That's basically just a stick with a fork on each end to wind line onto and shuttle the weft through our warp. And then we have a beater stick that's used to beat down those wefts within the warp to keep everything tight, or to open up a shed depending on the type of looming that you're doing. And we'll talk about all of that stuff as we go. We need some cordage that we're going to weave on our loom, and in this case we're using jute twine. And then we're going to need a series of what's called heddle cords. And these heddle strings or heddle cords are made of a regular hemp, and they go around the heddle on our loom and around our heddle string on our loom. And we'll talk about that in just a few minutes. All right, so let's first discuss loading of this loom. We have one peg on this loom that's marked with an H. That is our heddle peg. This peg will not get any warps or linear strings wrapped around it because it will be reserved for our heddle strings that we talked about a minute ago. And we'll get into those when we need to. So let's talk about wrapping this loom with warps to begin with. If we want to pattern whatever we're making in our project, we're going to need to use different colored strings in different places. Inkle looming is a warp-faced project, which means that all of the threads that are showing are going to come from the warp. The only thing that's going to show from the weft or the woven across part is going to be the outside loops. So if we want to have anything that's green and brown combination within the project other than the edge, we're going to have to put green and brown in our warp strings. For the sake of this demonstration, we're going to use solid green for all of our warps. That way it'll be easy to see for you guys. So what we're going to do is we're going to start at the back of the loom. And remember that this has to rotate around. This is a continuous loop. So what you would want to do is just tie your string onto this to begin with and just kind of tie it onto the loom. Here's what I generally do, in just a little overhand or a quick square knot that I can get undone fairly easy, like this. And I usually go from the bottom on that, like that, and I come over the top for my first wrap. And I'm going to come over the top of this, and we're going to go over the top of all of the pegs to begin with. So we'll go over the top of this, and then we'll come down and we'll wrap all of these pegs. We'll get one wrap of line around them, except our heddle peg. Our heddle peg will not get a line wrapped around it. Once we've made one continuous wrap around all of our pegs, again except our heddle peg, the second time around we're going to not go over the top of this first peg. We're going to go straight through here at an angle to this peg, just like this. And the rest of them will continue to be the same. And they will rotate just like that. So the next one will go over the top of all of the pegs. Remembering where you're at every time. And it's a very simple process of just going every other one. Now, you're going to need to decide at some point how many of these warps you're going to use for your project. And that will dictate how many heddle strings you need. It will also dictate how wide the project is. I've made these pegs about 6 inches wide, but you're not going to want to go much wider than that, because remember that you're pulling force tightening this up, and you don't have anything. This is an open faced loom, so you don't have anything here that's rigid, so you'd be pulling against this, and you're going to end up pulling these backwards depending on how you have them connected. I've got these nailed in, so they're pretty structurally sound, but if I put too much on here, tried to get this too long, no matter how long that nail was here, the stress out here is going to pull this sideways, and I'm going to have a loose project. This is really made for making straps and things of that nature. Okay, once I got this strung up, I took that one that I had tied off here and I just tied it into a tight clove hitch, and I clove hitched the last line. These are going to have to be untied after we get a few wefts in here, because when we rotate this around, they're going to have to come off of here. We'll talk about that when the time comes. Now we've got to put in our heddle strings. So let's talk about that. Now, if you remember from the first video, the whole pretense of this loom is being able to open up sheds alternatively to put in our wefts through the warp. So what we need to do is we need to take these heddle strings one at a time, and we'll pull one off. And the strings that are going over the top here are the only ones that we need to put heddle strings on. So what we're going to do is we're going to take them one at a time, and we're going to loop over them just like this, and then we'll come to the outside of this one like this, and we'll connect it to our heddle just like this. Okay, then we'll go in between another string with another line. We'll come over the top of the next one in the row like this, and we'll go in between a string here like this, pull this up and hook it to our heddle here like this. And we'll continue to do that until we are out of strings up here. In this case, we used 10 wraps around the loom. So we're going to have 5 of these heddle strings. And again, they go in between the upper and the lower, just like this. You don't want them to get wrapped up, so you got to make sure that they're separated properly when you do this. And this can be the problem, or the pain of doing this to begin with, is making sure that all of these strings are correct when you start. Okay. So once you have this set up, just walk through your warps and make sure that every other one of these has a string between it that's loose, and the next one has a heddle string on it, just like this. So you got 5 heddle strings and you've got 5 cords below here. Right there. Now, to open up a shed to put in a weft through the warp, or to weave our material, we lift up here to open a shed here, and we push down here to open a shed here, and we consecutively go back and forth every other one, just like that. Now we need to load our shuttle. Loading a shuttle is not much different than loading a net needle. I'm going to use regular colored cord for this. And it's going to be on the edges, and you'll see that when we get there. And all I'm going to do is hold one in place, and I'm only going to wrap the outside in figure 8 fashion, just like this. So I'm wrapping one side and leaving one side bare. And there's a reason for that I'll show you in a few minutes. So it's a little different than a net needle, although a net needle will work for this as well. So it's just a figure 8 fashion over the top, just like that. And load whatever you feel comfortable with. Just remember that the less string you put on here, the more times you're going to have to tie off and reload. The more string you have on here, the less times you're going to have to do that, but the harder it's going to be to get this shuttle through your warps if your warps start to get thin and you haven't rotated your project. Okay, so now at this point I'm ready to start my project. So I open up my first shed here by pushing up or down right in front of my heddle, and that opens up a shed area right here. I'll pass my shuttle through that shed and leave myself some tail, and I'll pull it right down over the top just like that and let it rest right on top. Then I'll open up the next one and go through, pull it down and let it rest right at the edge. I don't want to pull that together because I don't want this thing to start thinning out on me. It's important that you don't do that. Let it be a little bit relaxed. Just pull it with your hand till it's tight to the edge, just like that. And when you come back in, you can come back in there and beat all that down just like this very easily after the fact and get things nice and tight the way you want them. And these first couple passes of your weft are really going to dictate how wide this project's going to start out. So I'll seat that down in there tight, pull it to the edge just like that. Then when I open up my next shed, I'll come in with my beater stick and run that down tight and just make sure everything's right where I want it. And just snug it up just like that. I'm kind of doing this from the side so you guys can kind of see what I'm doing here. Like I just smacked the camera. Trying to keep everything nice and flat and nice and neat. When you're working on small projects like this, it's easier really to use a smaller shuttle. There's nothing wrong with having different size shuttles. I just wanted to make a larger shuttle for another project that I'm getting ready to start working on. The net needle worked fine for this as well. Now what you can see here is now that we're getting up toward the heddle area and we've been weaving for a little bit, it's starting to show exactly what I was talking to you about a warp-faced weave. What you're seeing here once we're getting this thing tightened up and going is that the only thing you really see of this tan cord is on the edge, and that's your wefting cord. And your warp is really the face of your project, or the exposed portion of your project is really from the warps. And we're starting to get a nice, good, tight, fine weave now, which is exactly what we want for strap material. And I'm just snugging it up to the edge every time before I change my shed. Now I'm starting to get up near the heddle strings now to where I'm not going to be able to get that weft woven through there, and we'll have to rotate our piece. So we're going to have to undo those knots at the bottom to be able to do that. So that's what we're going to talk about next. I'm giving it a little bit of spread as I go here because I don't want it to get too tight, but I do want a good tight weave. But I don't want it to get too thin either. That's about as far as I want to go, maybe one more pass before I rotate this project. Now we're going to have to rotate this so we get more room between our heddle to weave. Okay, so I'm getting ready to have to rotate my piece around. I'm going to take this cord on the end and I'm going to bring it, and I left that loose right there on that very first weave so that I could pull that through there just like that and then snug that up. And on the other side I've got to do the same thing. Remember, I had those two clove hitch type knots there. Okay, so you can see that this is already through here on this one, and now I've got this one pulled through here. So I'm just going to come in here and tighten this down, and now I have a circle right here, and I can just take these two strings and kind of tie them off like this. And I don't have to tie them tight right now because I can decide what I want to do with that later, but this will give me that rotation of the piece if I put those tails on there like that and tie that off. And I'll just put a loose square knot in there for right now, just like that. So to rotate this, what I'm going to have to do is take these heddle strings and I'm going to pull this backwards like this, push the heddle strings up, pull it backwards, push the heddle strings up, pull it backwards, push the heddle strings up, pull it backwards and push the heddle strings up, and that's going to, then I can dress up all of my pegs, and that's going to give me the strap underneath that I've already woven and the strap on top that still needs to be woven. And that's how that works, and it rotates all the way around until you're finished. So now we're ready to start back with the same process again of opening up a shed and putting in a weft and running things down tight. And you can see I'm almost 3/4 of the way up to the point where I'm going to need to rotate this thing again. And it takes no time to get there. You should be able to finish a strap this size, which I think this thing was about 10 or 12 feet. The last one I took off of this loom. You should be able to finish this in about an hour. Once you've got the loom loaded, and again, that is the most critical part and most tedious part of this whole process, really, is just loading the loom so that you can weave to begin with. All right, guys, well, I'm Dave Canterbury with the Pathfinder School, and I appreciate you joining me out here for another part in our Inkle Loom series. We're going to talk about a couple other types of weaving and easy ways to weave cordages together to make things like straps. But I wanted to finish this Inkle Loom series first. I'll try to get the build of this Inkle Loom up as the next video, but I may do another weaving video prior to that, depending on when I get a chance to leave the property and get materials and things like that. I appreciate you joining me today, and I thank you for your support. I thank you for your views. I thank you for everything you do for our school, for our family, for our business, for all of our instructors, sponsors, affiliates, and friends. And I'll be back with another video as soon as I can. Thanks, guys.